In this series of videos, I'm going to be overhauling the bottom end of my 2017 KTM 250 EXC. The bike has done 456 hours, still runs great, but I decided it's a good interval to do some preventative maintenance and overhaul the bottom end, including changing out all the bearings and also putting a new conrod in the crankshaft. You'll be able to follow step by step. I'll share any information regarding special tools and also tips and tricks. This is part one, and I'll be removing the engine from the frame. Before you start working on a bike, always wash it off. Make sure there's no mud or dirt. You don't want that getting in the engine. The first job is to remove the coolant, and you drain it using this bolt, and it's easy to spot because it's got a copper washer on it. So with the radiator cap still on, I remove this bolt, and if you keep the radiator cap on, it doesn't all spurt out. And then you can position your funnel, and then with that in place, you can remove your radiator cap. Then when it's almost drained out fully, you can tip the bike over to get the last bit. And next I'm draining the transmission oil using the Tokyo Off-Road oil drain tool. Next I'm going to remove the countershaft bolt. I'm going to use an air impact. It comes out very easily, particularly if you use blue Loctite. If you're doing this for the first time, I have a whole video which covers this topic, so watch that. You can use a breaker bar, in which case you need to press down on the rear brake pedal. It comes off very easily. Next I'm going to remove the chain. I use a clip master, so I'm going to use a chain tool. This one's made by Hozan. It's model number P221. Really good, very nicely machined jaws. They work very well. So I highly recommend this tool if you can find it. And very easy to take the clip off and put it on. Really great tool. And another nice chain tool is this Motion Pro press tool. It's quite unusual because it has two pins. Normal ones you have to go to and fro. This one you can, you don't have to take the tool off. You can just press and switch your tool over. So it works really well. And then I can remove the chain and remove the sprocket. And as you can see, I've removed the seat. I've also removed the gas tank. And next I'm going to disconnect the battery. So it's a good idea to disconnect the negative terminal first. And I'm actually going to totally remove the battery. I want to clean up everything. So you don't have to. You could leave it in place. So now I'm getting ready to remove the carburetor, and to do that the easiest way is to flip up the subframe. So you need to remove the lower subframe bolts and loosen the top subframe bolts. And I've just noticed the subframe bolts are getting a little corroded, so I'm going to get some new ones of those. A very good idea while you're overhauling the bike is to have a sheet of paper or a notebook handy, so you can note down the parts you want to order and replace as you're doing it. If you do it right at the end, you're pretty much bound to forget something. So do it as you go along. And next I'm going to loosen the hose clamps on the carburetor, both the intake and right by the reed valve. Okay, so I've already removed the silencer, so the subframe is free to move up. So I can move it up like this, and then using the upper bolts I can hold the subframe in place while I remove the carburetor. And I'm going to fully remove my carburetor. I want to inspect it and make sure everything's clean. So it's much easier to do that with it fully removed. This is a Keihin 38mm with a stick fitted. The stock carb is a Mikuni TMX, but the method is pretty much the same. The top cap is a little bit different though. And I always use a little bit of thread lock on the cap just to ensure the throttle cable can't come loose, and it also seals it from water getting in, so I think it's a good idea to use some medium strength Loctite on there. Just makes it a little bit more difficult to undo. And while I'm here, I'm going to remove the frame protectors. You need to remove it to remove the swing arm bolt, which needs to come out to remove the engine. And now I have the carb off, I'm going to put a paper towel into the intake of the engine just to prevent dirt getting in there. And while I'm taking bits off, I like to clean as I go. Even if you wash it pretty thoroughly, it's very difficult to get all the dirt off. So I use a spray and cloth and just wipe it off, being careful not to get it inside the engine. That's one reason I've put the paper towel in the intake. And you want to be especially careful of dirt above the engine, which could drop down while you're taking it out. And next I'm going to remove my Enduro Engineering clutch slave guard. And I've just noticed that the head of this bolt has been damaged, and it's not actually possible to get the socket on. So luckily they have the Torx inner. So this is one really good thing with the KTM fasteners. So I have to put a new bolt on there. And now I have the guard off. I can see it's quite dirty in this area, so I'm going to spend a few minutes cleaning this up before I take the clutch slave off. Okay, so now I have the clutch slave cleaned up. I can pull it off, and you should just be able to ease it out easily. And you should be aware that when you have the clutch slave off, you should not engage the clutch master. So maybe put a piece of tape on the clutch lever to remind you, and then you can hang this up on the frame somewhere out of the way. So I'm actually going to put the slave in a plastic bag, and then I'll put a little bit of tape around, and that'll keep the dirt off the inner seals. Next I'm going to remove the skid plate, the rear brake spring, and the kickstarter. One thing with the kickstarter is it can sometimes be quite difficult to remove. When you do get it off, it's a good idea to put some anti-seize on the splines, so next time you can get it off easily like mine. I had this off fairly recently when I did the Kickstarter idler gear mod, and also I replaced the crankshaft oil seal. So as you could see, it came off fairly easily. And I'm going to remove the breather tube located here. Next I'm going to remove the coolant hoses, and I like to use a 6mm socket on the hose clamps. I find it a lot better, and you're a lot less likely to damage the hose clamp fittings than using a screwdriver. Next, I'm going to remove the starter motor positive terminal, which is here. You just pull back the rubber cover, and then there's a 10mm nut on it. So you just remove that. And then you can pull the cable off, put it to one side. And I've disconnected the coolant hoses this side as well, and I'm choosing to totally remove the coolant hose thermostat assembly just to give me more room. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the left-hand radiator. As you can see here, it's been damaged and I want to fix that. Also, it gives you a little bit more room. This kind of gets in the way, so it only takes a couple of minutes, so I'm going to take it off. Next, I'm going to disconnect the stator wiring, which runs up here, and there's one connector here and another connector in the frame here. So you have to disconnect both of those. Before you do anything, I recommend taking a few photos of the wiring routing. So when you reinstall it, you'll be able to do the same routing. And there's a few cable ties which you need to cut, so be careful when you're cutting them that you don't cut any wires. And the connectors, they have a lock mechanism which you need to press down before you pull it apart. So I like to use a pick tool to press it down, and then they come apart pretty easily. And the other connector, I disconnected the other side so you can see that, but it's the same type of connector, and you just press down on the locking mechanism. And then the yellow and white wires are secured using spade connectors, so you just carefully pull those apart. And that's the stator disconnected. And next I'm going to disconnect the spark plug cap and remove the spark plug. And next you want to remove the engine braces, both sides. And next I'm going to remove the swing arm pivot bolt, and it's held in place with a nut here. So you need a 19mm socket. Then to remove the swing arm pivot bolt, you need to drive it out. I made this tool. I'll be offering these for sale on the Tokyo Off-Road web shop, and we'll provide a link in the description of the video. The pivot should drive out easily, so I'm just going to use a soft hammer and tap it out. But it's long. If you have a rod suitable dimensions, you can use that, no problem. Just be careful and do it slowly. Okay, and that's come out now. And now you can see what my swing arm pivot looks like. Then supporting the swing arm, you can remove the punch tool and then move the swing arm to the rear. And you want to hold this in place out of the way. Okay, so now I have everything disconnected apart from the engine frame bolts. So there's two, there's one here and there's one just under here. So I'm going to remove those now. So with the top frame engine mount bolt removed, I'm going to push out the lower one a little bit using an 8mm punch carefully from the other side. And it comes out pretty easily. And then I'm going to remove that and stabilize the engine while it comes out. You might have to jiggle it around a little bit. It's a lot easier if you have a helper while you're doing this, just to position the engine right. Okay, I've got it out now. Okay, so now I'm ready to remove the engine from the frame. I've prepared a stand here which I'm going to rest the engine on, and you'll need to lift it up, particularly at the back, to clear this section of the frame. So I don't have a helper, I'm going to be doing this myself. Lift it up and move it over and onto the stand. So it's not too bad on your own. If you do have a helper, it's a lot easier. And for those of you interested, the engine weight is exactly 25 kilos with the shift lever still connected. And obviously it's got no oil and no coolant. When I'm working on the bike, I like to use a cart like this. You can see I've got the engine on the top shelf and parts on the lower shelf, and it allows me to organize everything and keep everything in one place and move it around if necessary. Highly recommend getting something like this if you're going to be overhauling your engine. So this is the end of part 1. In part 2, I'll be disassembling the engine and inspecting it.